Okay, so hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Yofi Tirosh, and I will be moderating today's webinar. In November 2022, Israeli election results led to the establishment of Israel's 37th government, marking it as the most hawkish, religious, and populist government in Israel's history. On January 2023, Justice Minister Yariv Levin announced the government's plans to take over judicial nominations, a narrow judicial review, and essentially transfer all powers to the government. Given that Israel's parliament, the Knesset, is ruled by the coalition, that plan, if executed, would mean turning Israel into an autocracy. As many of you know, Israel has a fragile semi-constitution. Levin's plan also included narrowing constitutional rights protection and the court's ability to review such amendments. Much like epidemiologists and public health experts during COVID, legal scholars and educators have been explaining to the public the dangers in the government's plan for what it named the legal reform and what we legal scholars name the judicial overhaul. And we have been participating in the public and political discourse in many creative and innovative ways that we plan to share with you tonight. 120 law professors from all legal faculties in universities and colleges in Israel quickly formed the Law Professors Forum for Democracy. Members of the forum, many of them are here today, thank you, vary in political stances, academic rank, and research interests and expertise. The October 7th, 2023 war presented new challenges which will be addressed today as well. The US election results mark stark similarities between the directions of our countries. Trump's nominations and his plans to replace civil servants with unrestrained loyalists, to instill polarization, anti-immigration, and white supremacy, to take over regulatory agencies and remove guardrails, to come down hard on women's autonomy and LGBTQ rights in the name of family values, and to curtail free speech feel familiar to us here at the other side of the Atlantic. You have Project 2025. We have a think tank called the Kohelet Forum that has been underwriting the government's laws and policies. Both countries have indicted leaders. Yours is already convicted, who used their trial to present themselves as persecuted by the deep state. Both countries have affairs involving classified documents held illegally, and both are busy introducing voter suppression policies. In designing this event, we realize, of course, that there are significant differences between Israel's and the US's political, legal structures. Still, we thought that there was a high potential for a valuable conversation, and that's why we are here. The first part of this meeting will include 6 short presentations, 6-minute presentations, covering our situation and the various aspects of the forum's activities. And then we will open, my presentation is here's the agenda. We'll open for questions and remark. After that, we will break into rooms to discuss specific issues as shown in this slide. And then we will re-adjourn for a short summary. The general part of this meeting is recorded. Before we begin, I'd like to give special thanks to forum members, Meital Pinto and Yair Sagi, and to the forum's coordinator, Snil Schwartz, for making this event possible. Thank you very much. So let's begin, and with your permission, I'll not elaborate on the speaker's academic record, but rather present them only by institutional affiliation. First to present is Professor Tamar Rostovsky-Brandes from Ono Academic College. Professor Rostovsky-Brandes will give highlights of the democratic backsliding in Israel. Amount, please.
Okay, so I'm sharing my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, but
My
nothing.
I can't hear you, Sunil?
No, it's great. It's great.
Okay, so my task is to give you an overhaul, an overview, a brief introduction of the judicial overhaul in 6 minutes, well, 550 minutes. And I'm going to open by saying, basically, first by making two introductory preliminary comments. The first is that when Yariv Levin presented his judicial overhaul plan, or his reform in his words, we had two things that worked, we, the law professors, forum in our advantage. The first was that Levin was very arrogant and he presented the entire plan as a whole. So as opposed to other places that we knew, like Hungary and Poland, where changes were introduced in pieces one by one, and it took time to understand exactly what they meant or where this was going, because Levin presented his entire plan as a whole and stated that it was just the first course of what he intended to do, it was very clear from the beginning that something very dramatic was going on. The second thing that worked in our advantage was that the comparative knowledge, because we've been to so many conferences and we've heard colleagues from Hungary and colleagues from Poland and colleagues from other countries, and we had academic background in democratic erosion, we were actually able to identify what Levin was, the reforms that were presented as parts of, a populist textbook that we already knew from our academic work. So it was really putting what we knew academically into action in the activist scene. Now, what Levin presented initially, and my colleagues will talk about how this changed over time, especially after the October 7th war, was a reform that included 6 main elements. The first was, I'm going to go over them very briefly. They're generally in front of you in this slide. The first was to take over the committee for the selection of judges. The second was to restrict judicial review of legislation by requiring a supermajority of justices in order to invalidate a law and declare it as unconstitutional. The third was to add an override clause to Israel's basic laws in a way that would allow a simple majority or a 61 majority, simple majority of members of the Knesset to reinstate a law that was declared as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, or even to shield it from judicial review in the first place. The fourth proposal was to render basic laws completely immune from judicial review, despite the fact that there's no special procedure for the enactment of basic laws in Israel. So basically any law can be enacted as basic law in the court. And the idea was through the regular procedure, and the idea was to shield them from judicial review. The fifth part of the plan, the initial plan, was to restrict judicial review of the executive branch by denying the ability of the court to invalidate governmental decisions based on unreasonableness. And the sixth part of the plan was to weaken the role of the Attorney General and the role of government legal advisors, and to change the way in which they are appointed and the ways in which they are fired. Now, in order to fully understand each of these proposed reform, you have to have a more robust knowledge of the Israeli justice system and of the context of them, of course. But I think what you can see just by seeing the big picture is that all of these changes are really taken from the populist textbook, in the sense that they're all aimed at one direction, which is removing checks on governmental power. So it's either restricting the institution, restricting checks on powers, or taking over institutions that perform their role and on checks and on balance on government power. Now, the last point I want to make, and I think this will again come up, is the motivation for the overhaul. And I think the motivation for the overhaul it's important to understand it, because it again explains the way things unfolded later on. One motivation was really ideological. So Levin is an ideologist of the judicial reform of the overhaul. He really believes, I think, in unlimited governmental power. And he basically pushed this entire reform out of out of a desire to see these changes and to change the balance of power between the different branches in the state. But other parts of Netanyahu's coalitions had different interests, and they viewed the reform as a means rather than an end in itself. So one part of the coalition was the annexation movement, which was not so interested in the reform as such, but they saw the opportunity in removing limitations and checks on government power and legal checks and legal limitations on various moves that could further the goal of annexation of the territories. The second motivation, or the second part group, was the ultra-Orthodox. So again, the ultra-Orthodox parties aren't then generally that interested in the justice system, but they're very interested in the exemptions for military service, which the Supreme Court declared to be illegal and unconstitutional. So they were interested in weakening the Supreme Court and in weakening the justice system as a way of overriding the determination that exemption was illegal. And finally, there's Netanyahu's personal interests. And here, the last thing I'm going to say, that I think that initially, Netanyahu was not the driving force behind the overhaul. It was Levin, it was the other members of the coalition. It was not necessarily Netanyahu's personal rift with the justice system and his criminal trial. But I think that recently, it actually has shifted, and nowadays it plays a major role in especially the discussions on the power of the Attorney General and the proposals to remove the Attorney General, which are on the table now. I'm done within my time.
Thank you very much. You set an excellent model for our next speakers, which I'm sure will behave similarly. So next up is Professor Ronit Levin-Schnur from Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law. And Professor Levin-Schnur will describe the Law Professors Forum for Democracy's formation and activities. Ronit, please.
Hi, good evening, good morning. Just to confirm, you have my slides, right?
Yes, we see them.
All right. So as Tamar just described, what we faced at the early days of January 23, and even to some extent before then, immediately after the election on November 1st, 2022, was something that we could expect from past experiences to reach its goals within no time. But then the Israeli civil society fought back, and I want to describe to you within these 5.5 minutes what we at the Israeli Law Professors Forum for Democracy have done in the first year of our activities, of the year 2023. And so it's year one, and I can expect that we will have to keep our activities for years to come. So the first thing was to identify that there is a need for a research-based lobbying. That was the most significant identification that we have had very early on. Before the formal formation of the forum, and I say formal formation despite the fact it was never really formally formalized, that we have had a WhatsApp group initiated by some of the friends here, including Eliav Liblich and Itai Bar Simantov and others. And from this WhatsApp group of law professors and scholars, we have started to discuss the need to work together to address the government's wishes, the government's plan. And then we just started, this was an idea I've had, that we have to have position papers, which will be as good as we can get them. It's like very dense at times, analytic analysis by experts, relevant experts. And we have started with this. We had our first position paper submitted to the Knesset committee that discussed these proposals, these reform proposals, just the first days of its hearings. And over the first 9 months, from January to September, we have had in total 58 position papers composed together. They possess over about 700 pages. They are addressing the general public, but written in a way that is profound and reflects the expertise of the members. However, this was just the beginning. The idea was to transform knowledge to public education, to public engagement. And here on the top right side, you see Dr. Shelley Avni providing the first house meeting. She just thought we need to explain to people what's happening. That was November 17th, 2022. So even before the government was formally convened. And over time, we have had hundreds of such house meetings. There was a group amongst us that led these activities, including Yair Sagi and Tamar Rostovsky-Brandes. Here you can see Meital Pinto, and Tzvika Anna is here in the back on a settlement in the West Bank. So we have just had plenty of such public events in houses, in community centers, in companies. Many of the people who then went to demonstrations and knew what they are fighting for were educated either by reading our papers, but more likely by attending one of our sessions. But this was not it. We also have been involved in uncountable amount of events of public engagements. From demonstrations, here you see Professor Yaniv Roznai, Professor Ronen Avraham, Ruth Alperin Kedar, from public demonstrations to public debates. We attended Knesset meetings. Here you can see Professor Adam Shenar, Professor Ori Aronson, and Professor Eyal Gross. We've met with politicians, including the president. Israeli president is here, hidden a bit. We have attempted each and every avenue we could think of. We even had a TikTok channel with very simplified explanations. Here I am on one of the demonstrations distributing our materials. So people were actually walking and reading. We had postcards, we had full position papers published. Of course, we also participated ourselves in demonstrations, but some of the activities were really engaging. Here you see a group of professors with students walking on the streets, going out to the bars. Professor Manal Totri-Jubran, we had explanations and gatherings in Hebrew, in English, in Arabic. We started preparing with others materials for high schools, for schools. There were local elections coming up, and we identified this being a huge event. Eventually, it did not occur on time because of October 7th. So we just kept searching for each and every avenue to expand people's knowledge. Unfortunately, October 7th hit us so hard. And here, it's just a demonstration for something that we have been doing during the protests, projecting on the UN headquarters or other buildings in New York. And then immediately after October 7th, of course, we shifted our focus to the war and to the abduction of civilians. And others will discuss what have happened since then. So the main takeaways I would suggest, keeping in time, Yofi, right? Here in this picture with Professor Kimlen Shapley, and Professor Tamar Megiddo and myself. It's a very, very early on when I started thinking, what do we need to do? Professor Eli Salzberger suggested we'll speak to Professor Shapley, and we had her in a webinar. We asked her what to do. And she said, work fast and work together. And that was our motto the entire time. She also said, you have friends, and I appreciate those of you from abroad that attend this event. Our friends are very important, and you also can see us as your friends, and now we have so much knowledge and experience to share. Really quickly, let me just say organization is pivotal. Without organization, without organized activities, to organize, to coordinate our group of 120 or 140 law professors, nothing would have happened. Each and every of the 58 position papers was subject to democratic vote and conversations and discussions. And also another point is that all avenues are relevant. Every channel that can be used should be used. We need to get to the people. People don't know the facts. They don't know the meanings of the facts. And we're the link to explain it to them. We need to simplify things, but still keep it professional. Sometimes it's hard, but it's important. We need to be a part of a system of networks, not to work alone, always ask who can we work with. And two final thoughts, really not for 10 seconds time limitation, but the things that I take away with me from since October 7th and in total, there's a question whether we need to be always in defense or move to reconstruction, proposals for change, etc., whether we need to compromise or stand on our red lines. These questions are really hard to grasp with as things occur, and especially over time, since the war, it's very hard to face tough questions. What could we have done differently? But the one thing that I'm definitely convinced is that everything we have done was better than nothing. So being active is always better than passivity. So that's my main takeaway, I think. Thank you very much. Apologies for needing to leave soon, but I do appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronit. And our next speaker is Professor Meital Pinto from Safed Academic College and On Academic College. Professor Pinto will further describe the achievements and challenges that the forum has faced.
Thank you, Yofi, and thank you, everyone, for coming and for having me. My name is Meital Pinto. I currently serve as a co-chair of the Israeli Law Professors Forum for Democracy, alongside Professor Barak Medina and Professor Yair Sagi. I will now speak very shortly because I don't have a lot of time, and Ronit and Tamar and Yofi already covered most of the things I wanted to say. So I'll speak very shortly about the current challenges we face today, that the Israeli Law Professors Forum face today, more than a year after October 7th. And I see three main challenges. So the first one is capturing public attention and overcoming protest fatigue. So what we have in Israel, we have so many people affected by the war, displacement, military service, and the ongoing conflict. It's very difficult to focus public attention on democratic threats. People are literally overwhelmed. Most of us find it hard to process anything out of our immediate needs that concern our family, our job, and our close community. This challenge relates to the overcoming protest fatigue. Protests have shrunk, and people are tired, overwhelmed, and losing hope. While activists remain determined, it's a challenge to sustain momentum. Despite this challenge, the constant message that I'm trying to convey in every place I speak is that the struggle for democracy is never easy or short. Israeli public, I'm sure you know it, Israeli public like actions to be short and effective. But there is no one short single act that can retrieve our democracy, and we have to understand that. The second point, the second challenge, is facing the new government strategy, and I want to elaborate on that. So during the constitutional crisis in 2023, that Professor Ostowski-Brandes talked about and Professor Levin-Schnorr talked about, the coalition operated within the framework of the rule of law. They presented a coherent plan for amending basic laws. Now, although their efforts ultimately failed, there was at least a semblance of order to their approach, a semblance of preserving and respecting the rule of law. Today, the situation is entirely different. The coalition is operating in a space that is outside the rule of law. That's the way I see it, at least. It bypasses legal norms and openly and publicly undermines gatekeepers like the Supreme Court of Israel and the Attorney General. Instead of advancing structured legislative agenda, the coalition floods the Knesset with seemingly minor private bills. Each of these bills, however, poses a significant threat to democracy. And the sheer speed at which they are introduced and sometimes passed is alarming. I will address this challenge later on in the end. The third challenge is addressing internal academic criticism. One of the challenges we face comes from within the academia itself. Some professors have been working to discredit our forum. I don't want to mention any names. It's not important. Just know that they exist. They portray us as an elite group aligned with the opposition, serving the interest of the judiciary, legal advisors, human rights organizations, and other so-called establishment institutions. Now, these critics claim that we are detached from the broader public. They label us as affluent Ashkenazi academics from privileged backgrounds who are insulated from the real struggle of Israeli society. This narrative has gained, unfortunately, traction, influencing public perception. The truth, however, is far more nuanced. Many of us, myself included, do not fit this stereotype or description. For example, I'm a first generation to higher education. I'm not an Ashkenazi. I'm not from a wealthy family. I am a senior faculty member, but I work at academic institutions where tenure and sabbaticals are not an option. This false framing also ignores the diversity of those opposing the government's anti-democratic measures. In 2023, we witnessed authentic grassroots protest emerging from geographically and socially peripheral areas like Ashdod, Yavne, Afula, Beersheva. I was there in these locations, delivering speeches about the judicial overhaul, and I still do it today. Now, these movements reflect the broader spectrum of Israeli society and underscore that the fight for democracy is not limited to a single socioeconomic class. Our challenge is therefore to respond to this criticism without falling into the traps set by these narratives. Instead of engaging on their terms, we should aim, and we aim to present the truth that our forum represents a wide array of voices and that the struggle for democracy is a shared concern across all segments of Israeli society. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions in the break room rooms or anywhere else you would like to ask them. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much, Meital. Our next speaker is Professor Eyal Benvenishti from Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law. And Professor Benvenishti will talk about the challenges of the October 7 war. Eyal, please.
Thank you, Yofi. Good evening, good morning. So I think we can say there were two periods of time since October 7. The first period was a period of shock, of silence. Initially, everybody's so-called under the stretcher, uniting to respond to the horrendous attack, a sense of common purpose, but also a sense that the judicial overhaul is dead, that the coalition has suffered a major setback. The days are numbered. Netanyahu is history. And we actually managed to survive as a vibrant liberal democracy. That was the initial thought at the early weeks and months. But then came the second period in which it became clear that the indefinite continuation of the war was about securing the regime change and the consolidation of power. So to paraphrase from Clausewitz in a way that I'm sure he never intended, the war or the continuation of the war was actually about the continuation of politics, about domestic politics through other means, much crueler means. So now the overhaul was actually needed in order to immunize the coalition from accountability. And this is under the pretense of continuation of the war. There is no commission of inquiry, no accountability, and the coup is continuing through many means, as was described earlier. And then came, I think, a split among us in the forum between, I would distinguish between the reaction of the forum to the internal aspects of the war and the external aspect of the war. So internally, there were issues related to the war that gained the forum's attention and reaction. So limitation of speech of Palestinian citizens, the police interference with political freedoms of Palestinian citizens did gain the attention and the reaction of the forum. Similarly, the forum reacted to the torturing of Hamas and other detainees in detention centers in Israel. The external aspect, however, was not treated by the forum. Questions of compliance with international law, with Israeli domestic law, questions of war crimes, crimes under Israeli military law were not dealt with by the forum. It was a conscious decision to avoid an internal rift between the members of the forum. In retrospect, I'm not sure that that rift and that inaction was that problematic, maybe because any reaction would not be effective. Some of us were told that it's better not to act formally or present views that formally declare illegalities, that it's better to influence indirectly. And most probably, reaction by the forum would have created reaction or negative reaction by many Israelis who are supportive of the resistance to the overhaul. And some of us have continued to be more vocal, but not through the forum, through other means, especially through the alternative forum or the additional forum of the international law professors. I think that there has to be a time, a moment in which we will have to reflect back on the decision not to be open about questions of the conduct of the war and the continuation of the war from a legal perspective. Maybe this is not the time for it, but that's the situation that we need to give account to, at least to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eyal. Now I am up next. So I'd like to make 2 points. One regarding the forum's place in the overall protest against the judicial overhaul, and another regarding gender equality. Our forum served as a model for other groups of academics, such as the Forum of Political Scientists for Democracy and the Forum of Jewish Studies Scholars for Democracy. On another level, other professional, non-academic groups have created the action groups around which they operate. For example, the Black Gowns, a group of activist lawyers, mental health professionals for democracy, Brothers in Arm, the protest of military reservists and veterans, the high-tech protest, the Handmaid's Tale marches by a network called Women Building an Alternative, and more. One of the most moving moments for me was when I received a phone call from a family doctor who said, "Hi, I heard that you're the person to talk to on women's rights versus religious freedom. I'd like to write a document on the health effects of sex segregation, of women sitting at the back of the bus and in other places." During the first months of the protest, not a day went by when I and many of us didn't have new phone numbers added to our contact list and tagged under protests. We've been collaborating, exchanging expertise and information, and creating networks that I analogized to a mycelium, the underground network of the hidden parts of the fungi that fertilizes the soil and nourishes other organisms. For me, this sense of connectedness backed by actual infrastructure such as contact info and WhatsApp groups is an important source of resistance. By the way, for those of you who are looking for research projects, I think these new formations of civic participation should be more studied and theorized, as they are akin to labor unions, think tanks, and non-governmental organizations. Yesterday, I heard Heather Cox Richardson, author of Democracy Awakening, on the Jon Stewart's podcast. And she said that in 2016, when Trump rose to power on the first time, we did not have yet any real system of community and resistance. And now we have millions of people strong, and are not going to go anywhere. Another uplifting aspect of this mycelium is that it flattened institutional and academic hierarchies. It should come as no news to any of us here if I say that academics have egos and are sensitive to status, recognition, and credit. But our forum created new patterns of collaboration across ranks that up until 2 years ago were inconceivable to me and to many of us. I don't want to romanticize, egos are still there, but they are significantly mitigated for the greater cause. In the first year of the protest, hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets every week, an unprecedented phenomenon in modern history. Since the war, the rallies are much smaller, as we already heard, and there are many explanations for this. We can get into them in the Q&A part. However, the fact that Israelis have it in them sustains my optimism for this place. My second point concerns the centrality of gender in Israel's democratic backsliding. I'll address three prongs. First, representation. This government has the lowest rate of women ministers and CEO of governmental ministries and heads of Knesset committees. Every official that ended her term or was fired was replaced by a man. Most of the women who are in the coalition are hostile to gender equality and promote Phyllis Schlafly style vision of patriarchy. Women in the justice system, such as the Attorney General and the former President of the Supreme Court, have been verbally attacked, and these days there is an inciting campaign against the Attorney General saying that if Netanyahu is assassinated, the blood will be on her hands. Second, policy. The government halted legislation prevented domestic violence if, it transferred hefty budgets to a party seeking to censor school materials on gender and directs budgets to promote values and causes such as family purity and conserving women's fertility in late age. And third, the government is promoting legislation to increase the hold of religious law, for example, by authorizing rabbinical courts to adjudicate on civic matters, by promoting a law that would permit businesses to refuse providing service if it conflicts with their religious belief, so masterpiece cake shop style legislation, and by institutionalizing more institutions and activities where sex segregation would be legal. Very much like in the US, transgender rights have been demonized, and Prime Minister Netanyahu recently humiliated even his own coalition gay member, the chairman of the Knesset, by not greeting his partner in an official ceremony after he did greet everyone else's wives. Unfortunately, the fact that gender is a through line of our evolving theocratic autocracy has been downplayed and very much camouflaged, and some forum members have been trying to alert about it. A group of us at the forum wrote a position paper on the threat to women by the judicial overhaul, and another group wrote about the danger of LGBTQ rights. We held about 100 salons for women's groups by women law professors about the dangers to women's rights by the judicial overhaul, and we keep interviewing and writing about this. Despite our efforts, I feel that this aspect of the judicial overhaul has a much greater potential for public opinion mobilization, and it hasn't been optimized yet. There will be more time to discuss these issues in the breakout rooms. One of them will be dedicated to gender. So thank you. And finally, our last speaker is Professor Itai Bar-Simantov from Bar-Ilan University. And Professor Bar-Simantov will speak about the concept of school activism.
Thank you very much, Yofi. And I know I have a very short time, but still I want to just start by saying thank you very much to Yofi and Snir for organizing, and for all our friends who participated, and also to all our friends from around the world that joined us. And maybe it's important to stress, if there's one thing that you should have understood by now, is that this is not us telling you how we already succeeded and we're just now passing on the knowledge and helping you how to prepare now. This is also us telling us, listen, we still need you guys as well, because the danger in Israel has not abated at all. So what I was asked to present, and I'll do it very briefly, is to present a paper that some of us, and all of us who are members of the forum, have written which basically gives an overview of many of the things you already heard, but also I think some self-reflection of what is the proper role of scholars, and specifically legal and public law scholars, when dealing with efforts, especially by populist leaders, to try to dismantle democracy. So first of all, just to give quick credit to my co-authors, Tamar, Eliav, Yaniv, and Tina. You can see their pictures here, the bold and the beautiful. And of course, just to say that this is just one of many articles that have already been written and would be written by many other members of the forum. And this is not purported to be the official history of the forum, of course. Okay, so just a very brief overview of what we do in the article. We explain and provide an overview and analysis of the constitutional overhaul in Israel and the various components of it. And I won't go into more details because you heard about it from Tamar and Yofi and others. And then we describe what we as legal scholars have been doing. And again, I won't go into details about it because you heard it already, but part of the role of this article is just to provide scholars from other countries some advice and just share our experience, what we did, what worked, what didn't work. So this is one part. But another part, I think, and perhaps most important part for us, was also a matter of self-reflection and critical self-reflection, and mostly asking ourselves in this type of activity, which some have called collectivism, have we still managed to keep the role, morality of scholars and legal scholars, and to what extent can we say, even to ourselves, that we did not compromise our role of scholars and did not compromise our primary obligation for the truth and knowledge. And our main argument is that in the context of counter-populism, this dichotomy between being an activist on the one hand and resisting this dismantling of democracy, and on the other hand, being faithful to truth and knowledge, is a bit of a false dichotomy, because the main tool that we exercised and we have is actually disseminating knowledge and truth. So we actually believe that there's no conflict here, but quite the opposite. And the other main argument is that one thing that we all learned from the Hungarian playbook and the autocratic playbook in general, that it is not done by a military coup or tanks in the streets. It's done by legal measures, constitutional amendments, legislation, and it's done in a way that tries to masquerade the dismantling of democracy. Usually you won't have people like Netanyahu or Trump or Orban saying, we do not want the people to have democracy, we want to have a dictatorship that we rule. They would say what we're doing are actually democracy enhancing measures, those type of narratives that the legal system is just taking away the power from the people, and we are actually doing reforms that would democratize our country. And we think that as legal scholars, we were uniquely positioned, and we even believed that we had an obligation to identify those manipulations and to explain them to the public. And we think that this is the major thing that we have done. Having said all that, of course, we still acknowledge that there are risks to legal scholars becoming activists, including to the integrity of our scholarship and to the status of academics in general. And what we do in the article, and again, because I have to be very brief, I won't go into a lot of details, discuss those risks, discuss the extent we can mitigate them, and what what are the counter arguments? But I want to say something very important, that our argument is not the desperate times call for desperate measures, and because we felt that we have to save democracy, we can do away with all our moral obligations as scholars. We believe that even when being an activist, scholars still have to be faithful to their inherent obligation to intellectual honesty. They have to act with integrity, honesty, and academic self-awareness, and being reflective and critical of what they do. And another important thing that I think we've done very nicely in the forum is having peer review. And I can tell you that from experiences of many of myself and many of my colleagues, when we wrote, and we often wrote together the position papers, people will say, listen, we can't make this argument. It might be beneficial to our cause, but this is not something that we could, stand 100% behind and say this is exactly the truth, or the exact accurate description of what the state of the law currently is. And after we did this process jointly, there was a peer review or unofficial peer review process by other members of the forum, and then it was presented to the entire forum, and the entire forum had to read it and approve it. And we had cases that people worked a lot and spent a lot of time, and the forum did not publish the paper because not enough people thought that we can stand behind it. And the idea was that even if you don't reach full consensus, you need to have a very broad majority in order to approve a paper. And I think those measures helped us, I hope and believe, to maintain our intellectual honesty and academic integrity, despite, for many of us, for the first time, for some of us like Yofi, they had a lot of experience, but finding ourselves being not only scholars, but also activists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Itai, sorry. That was Freudian. So before we break out into rooms, and I'll show you the rooms in a minute, maybe there are comments or questions that want to respond to this first part. You can raise your hand or maybe simply start talking. Yes, John.
Hi, I'm at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. Your experience is incredibly helpful, obviously, for us. But I'm wondering if you also faced what I think we may face, which would be harassment, possibly jailing, if we are active in protesting and going publicly criticizing what Trump's trying to do. I'm sure he would want to do that. I don't know how hard it will be for him to do that. And I'm just wondering if you faced any of that.
Thank you. Would anybody from the Israelis would like to answer?
I think we faced a lot of from the public, some of us even threats and threats to their family, etc. Of course, a lot of defamations, and as Meital said, specific people who went out of their way of talking against the forum. In terms of the government itself, I mean, there were cases that some members were actually even arrested in protests, but I don't think, personally at least, that we felt that threatened. I would say that today there are bills that are targeting academia, including one of them that, if passed, would say that academics have universities have an obligation to fire anyone who says statements that could be seen as supporting terrorism, and if not, the government could intervene and could also take away funds from the universities. So we are seeing those type of targeting. I would say, at least personally, I don't think we felt endangered by the university. Maybe some of my colleagues felt differently.
But from the university, no. But I think the question was from the government or from the university itself.
So first of all, yeah, we got
Nadila.
very nice backing from the universities,
Yeah.
but also
Right.
I didn't feel person
There
which
was a
is
case
threatened
of
from the
Nadira Kivkorian
Right.
that it was exceptional. I agree. It was, but this was a very serious, I think, mistake on the part of the university. Some of you know about it. Basically, there was a condemnation on the part of the university president. He forced her to apologize. It was a whole mess. There was a whole mess, a whole process, which shouldn't have happened.
And she was arrested by the police later, which
And she was arrested.
Was arrested by the police. Yeah, that's true.
But usually we do expect our institutions to act as a buffer between us and the state and to protect us.
That was a bitter laugh.
Oh, sorry, the university. Yes. No, I thought you meant your
Huh?
political institutions. That the bitter laugh is for the political
but I
institutions.
think that
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of delegitimation, and not you know, with the sense of firing or arrest, except for Nadira, and she's Palestinian Israeli woman, and I think that also made it easier to act against her, that she's Palestinian Israeli and Arab. But we've seen a lot of accusations, a lot of from the government, not concrete steps yet, and from some of our colleagues, as Meital mentioned, who say, "Oh, we are liberal human rights people, but those people are crazy. They just want judges to rule," and they have been actually criticizing some, including some people personally, in a very, very harsh way.
And I would even, sorry, I would even say that in the context of international law and the stances of scholars such as yourself that boldly state that Israel is violating humanitarian law, there have been accusations from colleagues on the other side that you and your peers are a threat that curbs Israel's ability to protect itself. You harm defense, and that's a really, like, it's a McCarthyistic accusation.
Absolutely.
And another question.
I must say that John's question shocked me, because I don't think that any of us thought that we might be jailed for the activities we are conducting within the forum. And if this is what the American thing will happen to them, we might be in a better position yet. But of course, Trump might inspire our authorities as well.
Yes, but there are
Other than
chilling.
David Enoch was arrested. Just
Yeah,
I think
but not for being a member of the forum.
no.
I will also say that
Demonstrating.
a couple of days ago, one of our colleagues in the forum, his partner is competing over a promotion in the court system. His partner is a judge, and the article in the paper said that because his husband is a member of the forum, that's a burden that would hold the prospects of nomination. So we have these kinds of effects as well. Maybe another question before we break up out to rooms. Okay, so let me show you the room plan. I will open the rooms in a second. I'll just say that there are many Israelis that prepared themselves to participate in the rooms and guide the rooms. But if you find yourself, you're free to move between the rooms.
Oh,
Thanks to all of us.
I was talking in my room and it was closed.
I want to apologize
that
to
was
Brendan. When Brendan was
The authoritarian regime of the central.
Okay, folks, so thanks for returning, and we will lose the last moments of our webinar for insights, further thoughts, stuff that came up in your rooms that you think is important to share with everyone.
I think a piece of it is the role as I'm Martha Ertman. I'm a law professor at the University of Maryland. I think at the heart, we talked about the, you know, what to do when your dean tells you don't say anything about the events that are happening in the law school. And that's a moment of very personal decisions. And as you said, Yofi, some people are more protected than others, depending on their place in the hierarchy. But I would love to hear how people navigate it, and maybe here or elsewhere. The program is immensely helpful.
I think that Neta should speak, and I don't know if she's here, but she spoke in our
is,
room of
yeah.
the minorities, and I think she was great, and she had a lot of effective advices to share. Neta, are you here?
I'm here, I'm here.
מה את אומרת?
Can you stop the share, Yofi?
כן. Yes, you can.
Well, can I just jump in
Avner,
on,
maybe
sorry,
Avner will talk. Because he raised the question and then I will answer.
Yeah,
Right.
I will have to apologize.
Bye,
I'm-
Alon.
Bye,
Thank-
Alon.
Bye, Alon.
Bye, Alon.
Yes, my question that I raised in the breakout room, which was the breakout room about EDI and the institutional response, was what was the experience from Israel, especially past October 7th, since I'm a law professor in Canada, and our experience has been very negative with the EDI organizations and structures in terms of the support that they've been given the Jewish, let alone the Israeli students. So, and then Neta had some insights that, yeah.
So basically, I shared the experience of Tel Aviv University. I know it's not necessarily what happened on our campuses, but at least immediately after October 7th, when we had like a tsunami of issues and complaints about students' expression, mainly expression, because in Israel, the students were not on campuses. During October and November, they only came back to campus in December. And basically, what I described is the mechanism that we applied to process a lot of traffic and complaints from both sides. Jews that complained about Arabs supporting terror, and Arabs complaining about Jews inciting racial incitement or national incitement, and the mechanism that we applied, which basically tried not to use formal disciplinary measures. We hardly used any disciplinary measures, even in cases where are really hard to digest. And we preferred intervening through what we call pedagogical measures. We talked to the students. We told them, listen, you put this on Facebook. Tomorrow you're going into the lab. In your lab, there are students who have families that are hostages in Gaza or have had lost their dear ones. And you know, how do you think this is going to work? And many of the students retracted or apologized or explained or went through a process when they said, I didn't really mean it. And so the pedagogical intervention, which was very, very time consuming, we basically worked 3 months just processing this whole issue. But the university did protect most of the situations in which there were complaints about speech that was illegitimate, and tried to contain.
There were also complaints against professors, because I think that's what Martha mainly asked about.
Yeah, there were two complaints. There were 2 complaints, or 2 or 3 complaints about professors in Tel Aviv. One of them was fake, and the other one was actually called to talk with the dean. It was somebody from the humanities, and she said, look, you have students in class that are on both sides. You know, how do you think the students are going to accept this? And he took it into account. I mean, there were no threats, but there were. The idea is that we take responsibility over the institution, both students and faculty. That this is our institution. We are the residents. We have to be responsible. So together with our rights, we have responsibilities, and we try to keep most of the incidents through dialogue or through some kind of conversation.
Thank you, Neta.
We did not discipline any faculty.
I'd like to add from my perspective that my 2 strategies are first to address the fact that if you learn law, you learn politics, that anything I say, any doctrine, any case has political implications, and we can't expect. And I say to my students, there will be points where each of you will sit in uneasy on your chair, and if you don't, and you spend your entire legal degree without feeling discomfort, then your law degree is not worth anything. And the second is to really take labor by saying, I will express my views as honestly as I can. I will also try my best to display present in the best light the competing views. And as long as your views are expressed with respect and reason, they're fine. You're not going to be marked or graded on the basis of your views, but on the strength of your knowledge and your analysis. I'm not saying it's a magic solution, but I feel that it helps. I want to respect our time frame. So this is the time to thank everyone for being here this afternoon and this evening.
Yofi, do we have time for Amnon question?
No, it's okay, it's okay.
We can stay if we want, but anybody who needs to leave is free to leave without, we won't be offended by it. So thanks everyone for coming.
You will not be offended, but you will be jailed.
No, God forbid.
Only in the United States.
We would also love to be in touch. We have a website for the forum, and you can Google us, and we would love to be in touch with you and discuss further. Have hope, have strength, and for better days for all of us. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Night.
Take care.
Laila tov.